Hi, big hello and welcome to watchers of my new video. Bit of a hold up between the last video and this one. Two reasons: I had trouble with my throat and I had trouble with my laptop. My throat's doing better now. The laptop, yeah, hopefully it's on its way to recovery as well. Been looking at, also it was frustrating because I'm looking forward to doing this video. Been quite excited about it. It's a terminology video. So you may be thinking, how on earth can someone get excited about terminology? All I can say is there's some very odd people out there, and in my case, though, harmless. So yeah, this video is called Untangling the Mod Words, and it's geared, I think, especially for people who are on or about to go on academic courses in the sort of related field that I do my videos about, cultural history. Particularly to help people, I think, that are about to do art history, just straight history, literature, drama. It's also likely to be helpful if you're going to study politics or several of the humanities subjects. And level, we're looking at A-level, Scottish Highers, as we call them here in the UK, or the equivalent where you are, and upwards from there. So especially, I think, people entering into uni courses. And it's about giving you a couple of helpful tips in remembering what some similar sounding words that are bound to come up mean and the differences between them. They're similar sounding words because they all have a mod at the beginning. They're mod words, which we're going to untangle. Untangling the mod words. The four mod words in question in this series of videos are modernization, the modern era, or modern period, modernity, and modernism. And we'll also consider the adjective modern towards the end. Now, in everyday speech, or perhaps articles, podcasts, blogs, these words are used quite loosely, as though they all basically mean the same thing, or their meanings are interchangeable. In everyday speech, you can get away with that, but in academic level, you won't get away with that. So I'm going to share a couple of tips to help prompt you to remember the different meanings. I hope it'll help you when you read those terms in your research and when you refer to them yourself in your assignments. So my two tips are two T's. First T, timeline. Second T, type. So we'll see how putting these terms on a timeline can be a helpful prompt. And also we'll see how reminding yourself what general type of thing each term is can be a helpful prompt for you as well. So we'll start with the timeline. Firstly, here are your arrows. This down arrow is us, right here and now. It's like a "you are here" symbol on a street map. The left pointing arrow is pointing right back in time to a time before dates. The right pointing arrow is pointing into the future. We then put three markers on our timeline, marking out more recent time. And we're ready to put our four terms on the timeline, to an extent, untangle them. So our first one is modernization. Our modernization bar goes right the way across the timeline. Then the modern era. Our modern era bar starts at around 1600 and keeps going right past the end of our timeline. Then we have modernity. Our modernity bar starts around 1800 and keeps going right to the end and beyond. And lastly, our modernism bar. This starts around 1880 and ends around 1950. Making them different colours, like I've done, might also help if you're a visual memoriser, like I am. So our mod words are now bars across a timeline. Before we do anything else, try pausing the video and looking at that timeline for a few minutes. What things do you already know about that happened on these different stages on the timeline? And there's no wrong answers. Anything that happens to prompt your memory is helpful. Considering what we already know can be a very helpful prompt, and we begin making connections and identifying differences from that prompt. Okay, so that's our timeline visual aid, and we'll return to that shortly. Let's go on to the other tip. types. To think of a word to describe what type of thing each of these terms are. And all four of these terms are a different type. Again, before we fill out any more historical information, I'm going to tell you what types I have come up with for these four terms. If you think of words that are better or more helpful, stick with those. The point is that they'll be more useful for you personally. And anyway, I might have hit a mental block doing this stuff so much, and obvious stuff just isn't, coming on my radar. So if you come up with a better word, you stick with that word. These are my type words. So first of all, modernization. Modernization is a type word, process. The modern era is an, easy one this one, era. Modernity is a condition. Modernism is a language. Again, maybe stop the video, think about my type words. What do you think they might mean? How might those words, process, era, condition, language, apply to what you know already about events on this timeline? What do they prompt? That's the point of them. So we're common now, put a few more words around our words, and we'll start with modernization. So modernization, this is my kind of rough definition based around my type word. Modernization is a process of developing technologies to improve and enhance life. Okay, next key word here. After process, next key word, technologies. When we hear the word technology, we tend to think of the newest and cleverest inventions in our own time. Perhaps the desirable devices like our smartphones, tablets, etc. Well, that's completely appropriate. But that possibly makes us think of a very fluid term, the technological age, which we always think has started in our lifetime. And when we do that, our timeline doesn't make sense. Well, okay, technologies. You have probably also eaten a meal recently. I hope you have. From a plate, I'm not going to judge you if you didn't, using a knife and a fork. The plate, knife and fork are technologies. Perhaps right now you're sitting on a chair. Technology. They're just older technologies that we find very ordinary and unremarkable, but they're technologies. We're used to technologies upgrading quite rapidly. But when did you last use a comb or a brush in your hair? For me, that's a very distant memory, but for you, that was probably not long ago. The comb and brush that you own are technologies that peaked 2,000 or 3,000 years ago and haven't significantly upgraded since. So you still have the same version of a comb, basically, as people did 2 or 3 millennia ago. Now, it's important to draw our attention to the fact that we are using the word technologies here, the plural. Because so far, we've talked about devices, appropriately so, because technologies certainly include devices, but that's only half of what is meant by technologies. Technologies are devices and systems. Early people in prehistory organise into groups such as families or small supportive communities. Those are systems. They develop shared gestural and then spoken languages. Those are systems. They develop strategies to sustain themselves, like hunting and farming. Systems. Fast forward in time, and those communities grow into societies, systems, which are organised using a collection of systems: government, laws, beliefs, and of course, language. Well, still, but which is now a more developed and sophisticated system. So keep in mind that when we talk about technologies in academic terms, we mean systems as well as devices. Our smartphones and tablets are actually a combination of a device and a system, and one is no use without the other. My laptop for a little while was no use anyway. The best we can ever do in terms of a start date for this process of developing technologies, called modernisation, is to go as far back as the oldest devices that we found. But of course, that device wasn't the beginning of the process. So, however old that item is, isn't the age of the beginning of the process. Going back to our definition, why have I used the word developing instead of inventing, for instance? Couldn't I have just said modernization is the process of inventing technologies to improve and enhance life? Well, firstly, it's to show that the inventions are seldom completed because they're continuously modified. It's also more accurate to say develop, though, because key technologies are not human inventions. The most obvious case in point is animals, which were not invented by humans. People improved and enhanced life by being able to travel further in less time on the back of horses. People could harvest more crops over larger areas by getting oxen to pull ploughs. Often it's a very long time before humans invent something to do the animal's job, what we call machines. The ancestors of all our machines are animals. Some of the ancestors of all our machines are us. We're animals. Animals are the ancestors of machines. Not all technologies are to sustain life, as they may have been in prehistory. Some just to enhance it in some way. Technologies do tend to always change life, though. The last thing to note about modernization on our timeline is that it is continuous. It's not always the same continuous speed. There are times of rapid change and times where it is very slow, but the process is continuous. And of course, during a slow-moving period in one part of the world, there may be a fast-moving period simultaneously in another part. Modernization can be time-bound and specific to a place, of course. If the bus company where you live is replacing its buses with electric buses, your local transport system is undergoing modernization. But in historical terms, this process is continuous and doesn't yet, anyway, have an end. It will have a beginning, but we don't know it, and presumably it will have an end, but we don't know it. So, modernization, our first one. Let's go on to our next mod word, the modern era. We notice that the modern era does have a start point, in rough terms about 1600, which is just a guide date. The modern era wasn't launched on New Year's Day 1600. The key developments happened previously to that, and key developments came after that. But having a general guide is helpful. It will prevent you from reading an essay brief asking you to write about early modern literature and end up writing about books that have been written since you were born. Now, I know none of you would make that mistake, I know that, but it is a common one. Also, this kind of prompting might help prevent you writing about a personality from ancient times and assuming that they had modern views. That's another very common mistake. So we'll go on to our longer sentence about the modern era, prompted by our type word, era. The modern era is an era characterized and profoundly changed by certain modernizations. So we'll see a link there with our previous term, but clearly the meaning isn't the same. As I mentioned before, modernization always changes life to an extent, but the modern era is identified as a period profoundly changed and characterized by these modernizations. So the three major developments are to do with the technologies, remember, that we call systems. These systems are, firstly, government, and that's the only one that doesn't have a kind of catchy title to go with it. The next system is science. Catchy title is the scientific revolution. And the third one is industry. Catchy title, the industrial revolution. None of these three things, government, science, industry, were invented in the modern era. All three are ancient things that already existed. Starting with systems of government. In a sense, consciousness of systems of government was new in itself. For most of Europe, this had just been assumed and thought of as natural. There were three estates: some protect and rule, some pray, and some work. Simply realizing that this is a system rather than the system sets minds to new thoughts. Early on, we have absolutism. where the whole nobility are no longer effective ruler, but rulers centralised around the monarch. Administrators are chosen because of their ability rather than their social rank, and nations start to have standing armies of trained employed soldiers rather than the retainers of the various nobles, who the king doesn't want to rely on anymore. Having a monarch at all begins to be questioned. Many states are far from sure that a monarch not of their religion will protect them, so the 30 Years' War erupts around Europe. Some experiments with republics last because of their model, for instance the Dutch. Others don't because of their model and various other reasons that I won't go into now. For instance, in England, following their civil war. Both nations in their own time stabilise under a system where a constitution actually rules and the monarch has become a key administrator. That's quite different to other European neighbours of theirs, like France, where absolutism is in place. More and more the merchant classes and their descendants are aware that they're the capable administrators and they bring the money in. Once they recognise that, it makes less and less sense to acknowledge a natural ruler and pay them unquestioned fealty. So at the end of the 18th century, the British colonies in America break free and form an independent nation ruled by its own constitution. In France, while absolutism had initially shown the capable class that they were capable, it became a millstone around their necks, so they overthrow the monarchy and start to form their first republic. Now, these two historical events are revolutions, the French Revolution, the American Revolution, but they're revolutions within the wider revolution that was already underway culturally. New ideas about nations either caused new ones to break free from empires, or the ideas about nations are promoted by empires to keep them intact. Multiple small nations unify under a shared identity. The Italian states become the nation of Italy, and the German states become the nation of Germany. Both are then well equipped to build their own empires. Something that no one would have believed in 1600 starts to happen. The people in nations vote for who will govern them, and who and how many are eligible to vote increases. Now, when each new group obtains the vote, they don't see it as a nice Christmas present or they've been done a favour. They see it as obtaining their right, and they see it as something in accordance with nature. When we go on to the scientific revolution, we'll also see how there's a big effect. The biggest effect really of the modern era is how we think, and our idea of nature is a modern notion of nature. As we will see again, the real evidence of the modern era isn't around us, but inside us, in how we think. As we know, in the 20th century, people imposed other new systems of government without a vote, dictatorships. The response of the vast majority to dictatorship was disgust at something unnatural. The vast majority were a product of the modern era. Their ancestors back in 1600 would not have seen dictatorships as unnatural, although they probably didn't like them, and would not have thought it was natural that they should have a vote. The way we think actually changed. And that's a great introduction to our next system, science, the scientific revolution, where that is key from the start. So yeah, we'll go on to look at the scientific revolution and the other two systems of the modern era and the following two mod words in part 2 of this video series, Untangling the Mod Words. See you there.